Hey, so it's Mordheim terrain time. To go alongside my Nurgle Diaries army, I'm making a 3-foot Mordheim display board. The first piece of that board being a wizard's tower. Mordheim's aesthetic is like the perfect blend of misery and whimsical fantasy, and that's my vibe, and that's what we're going for today. To make my life easier now, and in the future, I'm sculpting bricks out of modeling clay to then make molds of, which I can then reuse across all my future fantasy builds. When it came to making the molds, I chose the worst, hottest day to do it. The silicon was curing fast and my camera went flat, and after charging the batteries, this happened. It's not pretty, but the molds came out okay. Perfectly fine for stone walls, even though there's a heap of bubbles, it's okay. And I made another set, which turned out a little bit clearer, and then I just used them both for maximum production. This is my first real hobby application casting with plaster of Paris. I started out really carefully by tapping out air bubbles and making things level, but by the end of this project I gave up on all of that and I just dumped plaster in and took it out and it was perfectly fine. I also used a heap of old base molds too from my Nurgle Diaries army for some more variations in bricks. At this point I realized if I'm going to get serious with this project, I'm gonna need a system. So I split my working area into a casting station and a building station, so I can do both simultaneously and sort of contain the mess of both. This was a very, very messy project. After casting a bunch of bricks, I decided, let's build a wizard's tower. I basically made this whole process up as I went along, taking inspiration from a drawing I did a few months ago and all the cool art that's in the Warhammer online concept art book. I'm using a homemade USB-powered handheld hot wire cutter, which is a lot of words, and honestly, it's a miracle it works. It just works. My carving process is sort of loose and fast, and I sort of just have a lot of faith in myself later on that I'll make it look good. Okay, so this looks super weird, but I borrowed a bunch of rocks and stones and bricks, and I'm molding them with thermoplastic, which is a reusable plastic that you heat in hot water. The idea is to cast the rocks in plaster, so then I can have nice rocky landscapes without the weight of real stones, which are very, very heavy. Okay, let's lay some bricks. Construction adhesive is used for this process because it's cheap, foam safe, and slightly flexible, which should help prevent chipping. That's my hope at least. I don't know. Trying to get the bricks to conform to this rough circular shape is very difficult, and the construction adhesive bridges a lot of gaps. I'm doing it with the confidence that I can just fill any gaps later on and make everything look cohesive. I'm adding in a little section which is going to be a place for the wizard's apprentice to live. He will act as the doorman to the wizard. I want the main tower to feel as unwelcoming as possible. A wizard, I would imagine, would be quite reserved or annoyed by the constant prying eyes of common folk. So to get to the tower, you have to walk up a rocky, unkempt path to the entrance, then convince the apprentice to let you inside, and then you have to cross a scary, railless bridge before knocking on the brooding tower's door. So to make this tower a little bit more Mordheim-y, I'm making little extensions to expand out the interiors a bit. I sculpted one out of 2-part epoxy, and between you and me, I think it's pretty cute. Instead of sculpting another 4 or 5, I used more thermoplastic to make a mold. Instead of plaster, I instead used polymer clay to make the copies, because I wanted to make every casting unique before baking it. I also made them hollow so they would be lighter and also to conform to the odd-shaped bricks. Earlier on in this project, I gathered up a bunch of bits I thought might be useful, and I ended up moulding some of those and casting some door pieces out of epoxy. The reusability of the thermoplastic has been so useful, and I think well worth the investment rather than making silicone molds all the time. My extensions needed some wood support, so I made them out of balsa wood to add to the rickety, unstable, held together by sticks vibe. So now it's time to bring everything together. I used a homemade modeling compound to do that. I followed a tutorial from my friend Luke from Geek Gaming. Yeah, it turned out okay. The texture was a bit rough compared to the commercial stuff. It's not as strong because I couldn't get it super fine, but for this application, it wasn't a bad result. It's meant to look rocky and uneven anyway. Time to fill all the gaps with filler and make everything look good. I used a multi-purpose filler for this. It's good because it has some nice stone texture to it. It's super tough and you can use it like a paste or a clay and carve and shape it. It smells really weird though, and I was hoping it would dry white and be more porous like plaster for painting with washes later on, but no. Still good stuff though, and like it looks better the more it dries, so. I gave the roof a bit more love by shaping it with balsa wood strips. These will show under the roof shingles when looking up from below. Speaking of, let's make shingles. So I used EVA foam, just like my walking house build, because it has a lot of flexibility and thickness to it, and I just went to town, laying down shingle after shingle after shingle. It's a boring process. It's not fun, but I can't work out any other solution for making something that looks nearly as nice. By the end, I was using construction adhesive instead of PVA glue because while it is messier, it does have some body to it and has a lot of tackiness for shaping the shingles around the weird roof shape. And then I put on a nice end cap and decoration. And it ended up sort of looking like a fun like wizard's hat, which I love. I experimented a bit with chimneys before settling on a long, skinny one made from a paintbrush and some modeling epoxy. I had a lot of trouble getting the size right. If it was too big, it wouldn't look right. If it was too small, it didn't look right. Yeah, paintbrush, perfect size. The apprentice's tower top I wanted to be wood, so it would be a nice visual contrast compared to all the stone. I mixed up a 50-50 wad of milliput and green stuff, and I did some sculpting. I basically speed ran this because I had to rush off for the night and it was setting and I was panicking, and I think it turned out okay. I really like the aesthetics of a hand sculpted wood. Despite how rough my sculpting is, I think it has like a warmth to it that I wouldn't otherwise get with balsa wood strips, for example. Painting. This was really just me experimenting with different inks and washes. I wanted to bring in a lot of color that I could work with later. Mordheim is a dark, unwelcoming place. After a big comet crashed into it, it was all doom and gloom. But it's also a place riddled with chaos and magical energy, and I think using color is a good way of reflecting that. Also, pre-Comet, it was a bustling imperial city, so I went with colourful roofs as well because that's what they were, I think. I added some ground cover to visualise how everything was coming together. By painting and doing the ground at the same time, I could get a sense of the project as a whole, and I could see what needed more saturation or less saturation or more texture. It was a bit of a chaotic process, but it worked well. I applied pigment powders all over the place, just to add in different earthy textures and colours and desaturate areas that need it. It makes everything really washed out at first, but after a matte varnish, it really ties everything together. I'm really excited about this. I bought a whole bunch of old Citadel trees. They're nearly older than me, but I thought it would be fun to include them in this build because Mordheim is a bit of a throwback to old GW, and using these old trees would be a good tie-in. But, you know, out of the box, they were a little bit cartoony. They weren't bad, but they were a little bit cartoony, and they didn't really suit the Mordheim aesthetic. So I gave them a soak and a brown wash, and I hacked at them with clippers to make them a little less perfect. And honestly, I think they look pretty awesome with a little bit of love. They are really, really, really cool. They have the best of like old GW about them, but also they're dark and they look sort of more realistic now. This process of painting and texturing was just a lot of juggling, pushing and pulling back color everywhere I wanted it. The process wasn't at all a straight line, but what pulled everything together in the end was a nice thin black wash in areas where texture was lost, and it really defined a lot of the finer rock textures from the rock molds. Then it was just a matter of gluing on the trees after doing some finishing touches like putting on moss and flowers and doing everything I can to prolong finishing such a fun project. I'm really proud of this build. It was a big one. It was meant to be a centerpiece for the Mordheim table, but I think next time we're gonna have to go even bigger to one-up this project. So if you have any cool suggestions for the table, let me know. If you want to support me, hit up miscast.co for a bunch of cool stuff I make. My girlfriend also made some cute merch for me, which you can check out in the description. Patreon is another way of supporting me, which is really, really cool. And yeah, I'm also making an RPG, so go check that out. And okay, that's it. Bye!